at the end, right? So we talked about reproduction, sexual and asexual. Did we get this filled in? Okay, but adaptations. Now, did I talk to you about being careful in the way you phrase it? Okay, because here's what people will say. People will say the polar bear adapted to cold conditions. The thing you need to keep in mind is that one individual cannot adapt to an ecosystem, cannot adapt to new conditions. An organism is born with certain traits, certain characteristics, and it's going to be born with those. That's what it has its whole life. It can't change its characteristics. If I took a polar bear to the desert, can it adapt to that ecosystem? No, it cannot. It's born with thick layer of fur and thick layer of fat for protection and so forth. It has certain behaviors that help it live in cold environments. But that individual, if I bring it to the desert, it's not going to adapt to be living in the desert. But as a whole, a species over time can change. So the species can change slowly, sort of one small step at a time through natural selection to adapt to new conditions. But not one individual. So we can't say all organisms adapt to their environment. That's the wrong way to phrase it. The right way to phrase it, all species are adapted to their environment. And those traits that help an organism survive, we call them adaptations. You know, a thick layer of fur on a polar bear is an adaptation to life in cold conditions. Okay? Bright colors on a poisonous snake is an adaptation to warn predators off. So those are examples of adaptations. This beaver has thick, long teeth that continuously grow. That's an adaptation to doing what?
The fighting of the wood?
Yeah, to cut down trees to construct a dam and a lodge and so forth. Okay, it has waterproof fur. Is an adaptation to living in the water for most of its life. So those are adaptations that those animals have that allow them to be successful. All right, and this was just an example here. We don't need to do this, but for example, we look at this made-up animal. Look at its spiny tail. That might be an adaptation to help it avoid predators from behind. So an adaptation is a trait or characteristic that helps an organism survive. All right. So let's move on here. Now we need to talk about the needs of living things. So we already talked about characteristics. So all living things have 6 characteristics. Well, all living things also require certain things in order to stay alive. And that's what this is, the needs of living things. And they're pretty simple, and you probably know those. So first off, all living things need a source of energy. Now, on Earth, the main source of energy for all organisms is the sun. Which type of living thing can use the sun's energy directly? Ready?
Plant.
Yeah, plants can use the sun's energy to make their own food. Plants don't need to eat anything. What's that process called? Here? Plants making their own food?
I got the name.
Clear? Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. Now, can we use the sun's energy directly? Can we go out? If you go out and sit in the sun, then are you going to be full and you're not going to have to go to lunch or eat dinner tonight? No. So where do we get our energy? Food that we eat. All right. So let's say anybody who ate bacon this morning? Anybody? No. All right. What'd you eat for? More eggs again today, Caitlin? No eggs today. What'd you have?
A bagel.
Okay, bagel. What'd you put on it? Butter? Cream cheese? All right. Think I have bagel with cream cheese today. All right. Now, that energy that she's obtained, did that come from the sun?
No.
No? Where did it come from? All right, so the cream cheese. What's cream cheese made out of? Milk. Where does milk come from? Cows. Where do cows get energy?
Grass.
Grass. Where does grass get energy?
Sun.
Sun. So you can trace back the foods that we eat. Really, the energy comes from the sun originally if you go back enough steps. Okay? What about the bagel? What's a bagel made out of? Flour, which is wheat, which gets energy from the sun. So you can trace all energy back to the sun eventually. But plants use it directly. Animals have to eat stuff to get that energy. They might eat plants, they might eat other animals. Did anybody eat an animal for breakfast this morning?
No.
What'd you have, Tom? Bacon. What's bacon come from? Pigs. Bacon's for pigs. Where do pigs get their energy? Slop? Well, what is slop? Not mud. They don't eat mud. Grains. Generally it's grains, which are plants which get energy from the sun. So pigs don't eat mud. Alright, so all living things need a source of energy. All living things also need water. Now, can you live longer without eating or without drinking?
Without eating.
Yes. You can live weeks without eating. But how long can you live without drinking? Not maybe a week is at probably the very, very maximum. Probably less than that. We need a constant source of water to stay alive. Why do we need that water? So what's important about it? Yeah. So, but why is being dehydrated bad? What do you?
Doesn't keep your system from flowing, so blood doesn't go to your veins.
Oh, blood's important. Blood is composed mainly of water. And it helps transport things around our body. Our blood moves oxygen and nutrients around our body. That requires water. Also, the chemical reactions that happen constantly inside of our body, they require water as well. So let's see if the chemical reactions transport. Also, part of photosynthesis needs water. So plants need water to make food. So living things need water as well. Living organisms need certain gases as well. Well, what is air? Tom?
A mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide.
Yeah, it's a mixture of gases. Air is not like one gas. It's a mixture. And the air we're breathing is mostly what? Nitrogen. Then oxygen, then a bunch of other gases, carbon dioxide and so forth. But we need certain parts, certain gases from the air that we breathe. Okay? Which one do we need as we breathe in? Rosemary? Oxygen. We need oxygen. The reason we need oxygen, the reason you have to breathe to stay alive, is because every cell in your body needs energy. And in order to get that energy, your cells need oxygen. Plants use oxygen as well, but they also need another gas. Sophie? They need carbon dioxide. That's the necessary gas for photosynthesis. So you have the site, let's see this picture of Mr. Arcuri releasing carbon dioxide that the plant can then take in. And we have this cycle of carbon dioxide and oxygen. No, I did not. That's a photograph. All right. So living things need certain gases from the air as well. or they can obtain them from the water or other stuff. Okay, living things need a living space, an area in which they can live. So they need an area in which all of these things are present. Living organisms is a place they can get the energy they need, they can get the water, they can get the oxygen, the carbon dioxide that they need. So they need this living space. And sometimes you may have multiple organisms, multiple species in the same space, trying to get the same food or water, so on. And if you have that, if you have several species of animals, say you have deer and rabbits and other organisms trying to get the same trees for food, what are they going to do?
Fight.
Yeah, and we have a word for it. They don't quite fight. They might not even interact with each other at all, but they may.
Take it.
Yeah, we call this competition. They compete for those resources. Or does anyone ever have a garden in your yard and then you get sick of taking care of it and you just let it be? All right. So let's say you have some tomato plants growing. You're fine and you take care of them for a while and it's fun, but then you get sick of it. What happens in that garden?
It becomes a hunger game for animals.
Okay. Or not just the animals. How about what grows? Weeds. Weeds are just plants you don't want there. And so after a while, how do your tomato plants grow once all those weeds are growing with them? Not very well. And that's because of competition. So it's not that the weeds are having a fight with the tomato plant, okay, and their leaves are knocking into each other, but they're both growing, they're both struggling to get as much water and nutrients as possible. They're competing for those same resources, and therefore there's not enough to go around. All right, so all living things need a living space that can give them what they need. And then finally, the proper temperature. Living organisms have a range of temperatures in which they can survive. And there are different, in terms of animals, we have two sort of big categories: warm-blooded or cold-blooded animals. Does anybody know the difference between the two? Brandon?
Warm-blooded animals, they can heat their body by themselves, but cold-blooded animals, they can heat up their blood, so they have to go outside and stand in the sun to get
Okay. Yeah. Warm-blooded animals maintain internally a constant body temperature. Bless you. So humans, for example, what's average, normal human body temperature? Right?
Like 96.2 or something.
A little higher than that. Sophie? 98.6, we say Fahrenheit is sort of average, normal human body temperature. It changes, and some people's is naturally higher or lower, but that's around where they are. And that's constant. Whether you go outside on a 30-degree day with no jacket, or whether you go outside and it's 95 degrees out, your body temperature is going to basically be right around 98.6. It'll go up and down a little bit, but your body will maintain it. We have metabolic processes that warm up our body. We have ways of dissipating the heat to keep our body temperature at the proper level. We call that homeostasis. Keeping balanced conditions is homeostasis. It's not just for body temperature. It also applies to blood oxygen and the pH of our blood and the amount of glucose in our body, all sorts of things. Keeping the proper conditions is called homeostasis. And body temperature is one example of that. Natalie?
When we get sick, how come our temperature goes up?
That's a good question, because sometimes our body, in order to fight a disease, our body temperature may elevate. Okay, whenever you have an infection, your body temperature elevates. And sometimes it can get too high and can cause damage to your body. But it's just sort of your body's response to illness. Now, so what are some ways we have of maintaining homeostasis? you go outside and it's 90 degrees out and you're playing soccer for 90 minutes. How does your body try to keep your body temperature at the proper level? Jimmy?
Sweating.
By sweating. You sweat evaporates from your skin and actually cools you down. Also, if you're outside and you have to run your mile and it's 85 degrees out, what is your skin tone? How does it change? How do you look after you ran your mile?
Red.
Yeah, you know what? Do you know why that is? I mean,
Your heart keeps pumping faster and faster, so more blood rushes through your body.
not so much your heart's beating fast. It is beating faster, but that's not why.
Does blood flow increases, so then like more blood goes around, so you get like older.
Kind of. Your body sends more blood out to your surface of your body, to your skin. Because once it's at your surface, it can do what?
Cool it down.
Cool. It can get rid of some of that heat because it's at the surface. Right? So you get red. There's lots of blood close to the surface. That's so it can dissipate some of that heat. How about when you're really cold? You shiver. That warms up your body. What gets cold first?
Hands.
Your hands and your extremities, because eventually your body starts pulling in blood from those areas, trying to keep as much blood and keep your body temperature of your core area, of your brain and your heart and your lungs as high as possible, even if it means taking some blood and having your hands and feet be cold. So those are ways of our body maintaining the right temperature. We also have behavioral things we do. For example, if it's a really hot night, you have no air conditioning in your house, or you're camping, you have no air conditioning, you're in your time, it's super hot, how do you sleep? Like what body position would you take? So first of all, you have no covers on, right? Have you?
Like,
Yeah, you like spread out as big as you can, right? That's how you sleep when it's super hot. Why do you do that? There's a reason for that. Tom?
When you're curled up, you have more body.
Yeah, it's like you're maximizing your surface area so as much heat as possible can escape from your body. On a freezing cold night, you're camping and you only got this thin little blanket, how do you sleep? All like snuggled up, just trying to keep all that body heat nice and close and maintain your body temperature. Okay? And so those are ways we have of maintaining our body temperature. Sophie?
If you're saying when it's really cold and it's like comes like
Yeah.
is that why some people go numb?
Sometimes, yeah, or your hands get tingly because there's less blood flow there. They might start to turn like purple. All right, now cold-blooded animals don't have these same internal mechanisms of maintaining body temperature. Their body temperature will fluctuate, will change depending on the temperature around them. And so, for example, in the winter, snakes, which are cold-blooded reptiles, what do they do in the winter? Hibernate. Their body temperature in the winter, what happens to it? It goes way down, and they cannot be active at that low body temperature, so they basically hibernate. They find the burrow and they just stay there. Okay? So many cold-blooded animals will slow down in the winter, or go into a state of hibernation until temperatures warm up and their body temperature can come back up. They can't generate heat within their own bodies. Right? That's why snakes aren't or reptiles aren't active during the winter time, because of those temperatures. Caitlin?
Why do bears
And some mammals also, bears don't technically hibernate, I know we all say it, but they actually don't. But different animals, because of there is less food available, going into a slowed down state of activity allows you to conserve energy and live off stored fat that you built up in the spring and the summer. And so it just isn't, because there's not a whole lot of food around. Yes?
like why doesn't human live that way? Because like if we're outside and like if we're there.
Right, we may, but why don't we?
Because we have clothes that we warm.
We have clothes, we have food at the grocery store. We don't need to do those things to conserve energy anymore. All right. Skip it. All right. Those are the needs of living things. Let's finish up today by talking about spontaneous generation. You guys already read a lot about this, but this will be reviewed. So, do you remember what Van Helmont's experiment was? Did you guys read about him?
Oh,
He did the sweaty underwear experiment.
oh, the weed.
Yeah. Yes. So Van Helmont took some sweaty underwear, mixed it in an open mouth jar with some wheat, let it sit for 21 days, and then saw that mice were coming out of it. And so he has said that if you mix sweaty underwear and wheat, it will turn into mice. Because that's what he saw. Now, what was probably really happening in Van Helmont's experiment? Matt?
The mice crawled in and get
Yeah, probably the mice crawled in there when he was not watching the experiment and found a good soil that was warm. They found food there, and so they probably burrowed there and built a nest. What was wrong with the way he set it up? How could he have prevented this? CC? Yeah, just to cover the jar. Would the wheat and underwear have turned into mice if the jar were covered? No. All right. But why, it seems silly probably to us. It does. That people would think that you could have non-living material just turns into something that's alive. That's what spontaneous generation, that's what the theory is. So the question is then why, if it seems silly to us, why did most people believe that this could happen? Well, Matt?
They didn't have like all the technology and research and stuff to prove the disprove.
Yeah, the scientists hadn't done the research that we're going to learn about yet to disprove it. And it also seemed to agree with a lot of things that they actually saw. For example, people saw that if you had some meat and it was left out, after just a couple days, there would be these little maggots on the meat. Now, they weren't there before, and they didn't seem to be introduced by anything, so they assumed that after a certain amount of time, the meat turns into these maggots. They sort of agreed with what they saw. They would see that in the springtime, out of the mud would just emerge frogs. And there were no frogs there for months before. But these frogs just came out of the mud. So they thought that the mud turned into frogs. They thought hay could turn into mice. That bread turns into this living mold. Right? You leave a piece of bread out, it starts to grow and turn green and hairy, and that's a living organism. So the bread they thought turned into that mold. So they saw certain things that led them to believe these things. Even though we know today, we have explanations for all of these observations. Okay, so where does the mold actually come from? Is the bread turned into mold? You know where it comes from, Natalie? Yeah, mold reproduced by spores, tiny little cells that float through the air. When it lands on a piece of bread, that's a great environment for it, it starts to grow there. But the bread doesn't turn into the mold. What about the frogs? What were they actually seeing happen? Tom?
They were hibernating underneath the mud.
Yeah, they're hibernating underneath the mud, and they would see them emerge in the springtime. Even though they didn't see them go into the mud, they were there hibernating, they came from frogs.
How would you breathe for like?
They can absorb oxygen through their skin. They don't need to breathe, especially when they're hibernating. All right, so let's talk about 3 scientists that helped us understand that spontaneous generation is a false theory. Francesco Redi, Italian scientist, doing his research in the middle of the 1600s. He was the one that started to do the experiment with the rotting meat and the maggots. So the question he was asking is, where do these maggots actually come from? Many people thought that meat turned into maggots. He, however, had a different hypothesis. What did he think? Sophie?
Wait, me?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, we thought that flies and their eggs were meat and then explode and
Yes. He thought that the maggots actually came from flies. So he did a pretty simple experiment. He took 2 jars, put some rotting meat in them. One he left open, and the other he covered with a screen. And what happened, what he saw was that in jar number 1, flies were attracted to the meat. They would land on it periodically and lay eggs on it. And maggots then formed. In jar number 2, flies were again attracted, but they couldn't get actually to the meat. They landed on the screen, laid eggs on the screen, and that's where the maggot appeared, on the screen. So what did this tell him? Kimberly? Yeah, that the maggots were coming from the flies. So it wasn't the meat turning into maggots, because this meat didn't turn into maggots. But it was the flies laying eggs on the meat, which then hatch into maggots. And maggots are immature flies. They're fly larvae. Just like a caterpillar is a butterfly larva, a maggot is a fly larva. So that was one step towards disproving this idea that living things come from non-living things. But there were still some other scientists that did some more work to help understand this. And these scientists were working with broth. What is broth? Yeah? Yeah, it's a liquid made from boiling, bones and meat and stuff, and you get beef broth or chicken broth. And so what people notice is that if you had some broth, after a couple days, it would start to get cloudy. It would start to smell bad. It would make you sick if you ate it. And so they knew that there were these living microbes that were appearing in the broth. And many people thought that the broth actually turned into these microbes. So Spallanzani, he was an Italian scientist, again, working in the 1700s. He was looking at this question about, well, why did they form in the broth? Was it the broth turning into these microbes, or was there another explanation? He actually had another explanation. His hypothesis was that it's not the broth turning into microbes, but where did he think the microbes were? Nicholas? Yeah, he thought they were in the air. That there were these microbes floating in the air, and they would get into the broth and start to reproduce. So he did an experiment. He took some broth in 2 flasks, and he heated it up first. Then, in 1 flask, he left it open and let it cool. What he saw was that after a couple days, these microbes started growing. In the other flask, after he heated it, he immediately sealed it up, making sure no air could get in. And then he waited. And as long as he kept the air out, no microbes grew in the broth, even after many days. But then if he uncovered it, allowing air back in, then after that, a couple days later, microbes would appear. So what would you say his conclusion was? Does the broth turn into microbes? No, they're in the air. And as long as you keep the air out, that broth wouldn't spoil. Okay? Because he was removing the air. And then our last scientist, Louis Pasteur. He was French. He was working in the 1850s. Again, he was asking where these microbes came from, but he took it a step further. He didn't think that actually the microbes are just floating through the air. Where did he think they were? Brandon? Yeah, on little particles of dust. Okay? He thought the microbes were on dust particles, not just in the air alone. So he did a pretty smart experiment. He had to create a special type of flask. You remember what they called it in the article? Swan's neck flask, because it was this S-shaped curve at the end of the flask. And this, the reason they needed this allowed air to get in, but not what? Yeah, but the dust would settle in the curve of that flask. So he boiled the broth, air got in, but no dust, and that flask, it never spoiled. Microbes did not grow in it, even though air was getting in. The other one, he boiled. If he broke off the stem, allowing dust in, or if he tilted the flask, so some of the broth got into the dust, then microbes started to grow. So his experiment showed that, yeah, he was correct. The microbes are actually not on their own in the air. They're actually on these dust particles. If you ever looked at a real sunny window, you see all those little particles of dust, which is mostly just human skin, dead human skin. They're carrying microbes on them, and that's where these microbes come from. And so we know that this theory of spontaneous generation is false. It is incorrect. Why does Pasteur's name probably look familiar to you? You may have seen it this morning eating your breakfast. Julia? Yeah, because your milk that you drink is pasteurized. What does that mean? What do they do to pasteurize milk? So, yeah, they heat it up to kill any microbes that are in there, and then immediately seal it so that no dust particles can get in there and reinfect it. Okay, last thing, this is kind of interesting. Nothing for you to write. But people notice that drinking water out of streams and natural sources often would make people sick because of the microbes. But taking that same water